All right, let's go.
Number 12, the shadow in the well, the measurement that started everything. In 240 BC, a librarian in Alexandria, Egypt, calculated the size of the entire planet using a stick, a well, and basic geometry. No spacecraft, no satellites, nothing but sunlight and arithmetic. His name was Eratosthenes. He had heard travelers describe something strange happening every year in the city of Syene, near modern Aswan. On the summer solstice, by exactly noon, sunlight reached straight down to the bottom of a deep well with no shadow at all. The sun was directly overhead. On that same day, at that same hour, Eratosthenes measured the shadow cast by a vertical stick in Alexandria, hundreds of kilometers north. There was a shadow, a real one, at an angle of about 7.2 degrees. If the Earth were flat, the sun being so far away would mean its rays hit every location at virtually the same angle. No shadow in Syene means no shadow anywhere, but there was a shadow in Alexandria. The only explanation was that the ground in Alexandria was tilted relative to the ground in Syene. The surface of the Earth was curving. 7.2 degrees is almost exactly 1/50th of a full 360-degree circle. So Eratosthenes multiplied the known distance between the two cities by 50. His result came out to roughly 40,000 kilometers. The actual circumference of the Earth is 40,075 kilometers. A man with a stick, a well, and no technology beyond geometry got within a fraction of a percent of the correct answer more than 2,000 years before anyone left the atmosphere. Number 11, the ship that disappears bottom first. You can watch this happen right now. Stand at any coastline and watch a ship sail away. It does not shrink uniformly into a tiny dot the way it would on a flat surface where distance simply makes things smaller. It disappears from the bottom up. The hull vanishes first, the deck follows. The mast is the very last thing visible before the ship is gone completely. Bring a telescope and the result does not change. This detail matters because flat Earth explanations from as far back as 1881 tried to dismiss this as a trick of perspective and distance. But ordinary perspective only makes distant objects smaller. It does not selectively erase the bottom of an object while leaving the top intact. There is no version of perspective that explains a hole disappearing while a mast remains visible, unless something is physically blocking the view of the hole. That something is the curve of the Earth itself, rising between you and the lower part of the ship. Sail back toward shore and the sequence reverses exactly. The mast reappears first. The hole is the last part to rise back over the horizon. This single observation was already considered solid evidence in the time of Aristotle around 350 BC. It requires no equipment, no funding, no institution to trust, just a coastline, a ship, and patience. Number 10. Why you can only see so far. The horizon has a hard limit. Stand at the edge of a calm sea at eye level, and the horizon is roughly 5 kilometers away. Climb a tower, hill, or tall building, and that horizon distance increases. Climb high enough and you can see for tens of kilometers in every direction. This sounds obvious until you ask why it happens at all. If the Earth were flat, there would be no fundamental limit to how far you could see, only a limit imposed by how clear the air is and how bright the object is. Your eye is capable of detecting the Andromeda Galaxy, a smear of light that traveled 2.5 million light-years to reach you. By that standard, seeing the lights of a city a few hundred kilometers at a night should be trivial. It is not trivial. It is physically impossible from sea level, no matter how powerful your equipment is, because the curve of the Earth itself rises up and blocks the line of sight entirely. The horizon is not a fading into haze effect. It is a hard geometric wall created by the planet's own curvature. The higher you climb, the further over that wall you can see, in a precise mathematical relationship that has been used for centuries by sailors calculating how far away they could spot land. Number 9. The round shadow during a lunar eclipse. The universe has been showing us the shape of our own shadow for millennia. A lunar eclipse happens when Earth passes directly between the sun and the moon, and Earth's shadow falls across the lunar surface. Watch the shadow creep across the moon during totality, and its edge is always curved, not occasionally curved, not curved depending on the time of year or the angle of observation. Every single lunar eclipse throughout all of recorded history has shown a circular shadow edge. Greek astronomers in the 5th century BC had already worked out the significance of this. A flat disk only casts a circular shadow if the light source is positioned at a very specific angle relative to the disk's edge. Tilt that flat disk even slightly or view the eclipse from a different angle, and the shadow should become an ellipse, a line, or some other distorted shape. A sphere casts a circular shadow from every possible angle, every single time, regardless of its orientation, because every angle looking at a sphere presents the same round outline. Lunar eclipses happen at unpredictable angles relative to Earth's surface. Different eclipses are viewed from different hemispheres, different latitudes, different seasons. If Earth were a flat disk, at least some of these eclipses should have produced a shadow that was not perfectly round. None of them ever have, not one in thousands of observations. Number 8. Different stars in different places. The sky itself changes depending on where you stand. Travel from Cairo to Athens, and the North Star sits at a noticeably different height above the horizon in each city. Travel far enough south past the equator, and the North Star disappears below the horizon entirely, while entirely new constellations rise into view that are never visible from the northern hemisphere at all. Aristotle was the first to formally connect this to the shape of the planet. If you are standing on a curved surface, your local horizon is effectively tilted backward relative to someone standing further north, which changes the angle at which they view the same fixed point in the sky. On a flat Earth, this effect should not exist in this form. Every observer on a flat plane, regardless of how far north or south they stood, would be looking at the same distant stars from essentially the same angle. The North Star should sit at the same height in the sky for everyone, everywhere. Instead, sailors, astronomers, and travelers for thousands of years have independently documented the exact same pattern. Stars rise as you travel toward their hemisphere. Stars set as you travel away from it. The sky itself behaves exactly as predicted by someone standing on a curved surface, and has never once behaved as predicted by someone standing on a flat one. Number 7. Time zones. The sun cannot rise everywhere at once unless the Earth curves away from it. Right now, while this sentence is being spoken, it is morning somewhere on Earth, evening somewhere else, and the middle of the night somewhere else entirely. If the Earth were a flat disk illuminated from above by a single sun acting like a spotlight, sunrise and sunset would not behave the way they actually do. A spotlight shining down on a flat surface produces a smooth gradient of brightness, where everywhere under direct light experiencing daytime conditions simultaneously, just with varying intensity toward the edges. There is no mechanism on a flat illuminated disk that produces a sharp line where it is daytime on one side and full nighttime on the other, repeating in a 24-hour cycle for every single point on the surface. On a sphere, the explanation is immediate and exact. Only the half of the globe currently facing the sun receives daylight. The far half is in shadow created by the planet's own curved bulk. As the sphere rotates, every point sweeps from night into day and back into night again on a strict and predictable schedule tied directly to that point's position on the curve. This is precisely why international flights crossing multiple time zones require passengers to reset their watches multiple times during a single journey, and why a phone call to the other side of the world reaches someone in the middle of their night while it is still afternoon for you. Number 6. Airplane flight paths. The shortest route between 2 points reveals the shape beneath it. Look at a flight path from New York to Tokyo on a flat rectangular world map, and the route appears to make no sense. It curves dramatically northward, passing near the Arctic instead of cutting a straight diagonal line across the Pacific, the way the map suggests it should. Flight paths follow what is called a great circle route, the shortest possible distance between 2 points on the surface of a sphere. On a globe, the path from New York to Tokyo genuinely is shorter by curving up toward the pole rather than cutting straight across what looks like the most direct line on a flat projection. Every flat map of the world is forced to distort either the size, shape, distance, or direction of land masses because there is no mathematically perfect way to translate the surface of a sphere onto a flat plane without some kind of compromise. This is a well-documented limitation of cartography, not a conspiracy. It is the same reason Greenland looks comparable in size to Africa on many standard map projections, despite Africa actually being more than 14 times larger. Airlines plan thousands of real routes every single day using great circle calculations that only make sense and only save fuel and time on a curved surface. Number 5. Gravity points to the center, not down in one direction. Why people on the opposite side of the planet are not falling off. Gravity does not pull objects in a single universal downward direction the way it would need to on a flat plane. It pulls every object toward the center of mass of the planet, from every possible position on the surface. This is why someone standing in Australia is not hanging upside down relative to someone standing in the United States, despite being on what most flat map thinking would describe as the opposite side of the world. Both people experience gravity pulling them toward their own feet because both are being pulled toward the same central point deep inside the Earth from two different directions on a curved surface. This has been measured with extraordinary precision using modern instruments called gravimeters, which detect tiny local variations in gravitational pull caused by differences in underlying rock density, mountain ranges, and even ocean trenches. These measurements form consistent global maps of gravity that only make physical sense if the planet is a roughly spherical mass with its gravitational center located deep in its interior, pulling equally from every direction on the curved surface above it. A flat plane would produce a gravitational field that pulls everything toward its center and off its edges, rather than straight down into the surface everywhere. That is not what any measurement, anywhere on the planet, has ever shown. Number 4. The Earth's curved shadow on its own atmosphere. A shadow you can see from the ground every single evening. Stand outside just after sunset on a clear evening and look toward the eastern sky, opposite from where the sun went down. A dark blue band is visible rising along the horizon, with a soft pink or orange band, sometimes called the Belt of Venus, sitting just above it. That dark blue band is Earth's own shadow, cast by the planet onto its own atmosphere. The edge of that shadow is curved. The same curved edge is visible from virtually any location on the planet on virtually any clear evening, rising at virtually the same rate and shape every single time. This is consistent, repeatable, and visible without any equipment beyond a clear sky and a few minutes of attention right after the sun disappears below the horizon. A flat disk illuminated by a distant sun would not cast this kind of curved shadow onto its own atmosphere in every direction simultaneously. Only a curved surface produces a shadow edge with this exact repeatable geometry, visible to anyone willing to step outside at dusk. Number 3. Satellite and space photography. Thousands of independent cameras owned by dozens of competing nations and companies. Since 1946, cameras attached to rockets and later to dedicated satellites have captured images of Earth from altitude. The famous blue marble photograph taken during Apollo 17 in 1972 remains one of the most reproduced images in human history, but it is far from the only one. As of 2026, there are more than 10,000 active satellites in orbit, launched by dozens of separate national space agencies and private companies, frequently in direct commercial and political competition with one another. Weather satellites continuously photograph the curved edge of the planet as part of routine meteorological monitoring. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station live stream views of the curved horizon visible to anyone with an internet connection every single day. For every image of a curved Earth to be fabricated, it would require coordinated, continuous deception across thousands of competing private companies, rival national governments, commercial airlines, amateur high-altitude balloon hobbyists, and independent astronomers, every one of whom would need to agree to maintain an identical lie indefinitely with zero leaks across decades while gaining nothing from the deception that ordinary commercial photography could not already provide. The simpler explanation, by an enormous margin, is that all of these independent sources are showing the same real planet because that planet really is curved. Number 2. GPS and satellite navigation, a system that works because the underlying geometry is correct. Global Positioning System satellites orbit the Earth at an altitude of roughly 20,200 kilometers, and they calculate your exact position using precise timing signals combined with the geometry of a spherical planet. The math used by every GPS satellite explicitly accounts for Earth's curvature, its slight equatorial bulge from rotation, and even small local variations in its gravitational field in order to return positioning accuracy of a few meters anywhere on the surface. This system did not emerge from theory alone. It is tested literally billions of times per day by billions of devices, including the exact device most people are holding while watching this video. If the underlying geometric model of a curved, rotating, slightly oblate planet were wrong, GPS would not function with anything close to its current accuracy. Positioning errors would compound rapidly and visibly, breaking everything from commercial aviation navigation to the rideshare app on a phone within hours of incorrect assumptions being built into the system. GPS has worked continuously and globally since the 1990s. It is independently used by competing companies, militaries, and governments around the world, none of whom have any incentive to maintain a shared technical lie about the basic shape of the planet their navigation systems are calculating positions on. Number 1. Every astronaut from every competing nation has seen the same thing. The final piece of evidence nobody has ever successfully disputed. Since Yuri Gagarin became the first human to reach orbit in 1961, more than 700 people have traveled to space. They've launched from the Soviet Union, the United States, China, and a growing list of other nations, frequently during periods of intense political rivalry and mutual distrust between their governments. Every single one of them has reported, photographed, and filmed the same curved horizon. Cosmonauts from a Soviet space program built specifically to compete with and outpace the United States during the Cold War described and photographed a curved Earth. American astronauts racing to beat the Soviets to the moon described and photographed the exact same curve. Chinese, Japanese, European, and private commercial astronauts in the decades since have all continued to report identical observations, despite having no coordination with each other and, in many cases, active political incentive to contradict one another wherever possible. A flat Earth conspiracy spanning more than 700 individuals across more than a dozen independent space programs and private companies operating across more than 60 years of intense geopolitical rivalry with absolutely nobody ever breaking ranks to correct the supposed lie is not a more plausible explanation than the simplest one available. The planet is round. Every method of measuring it, observing it, navigating across it, and photographing it from above for over 2,000 years has returned exactly the same answer. 12 ways we know the Earth is round. A shadow in an ancient well. A ship vanishing hull first into the horizon. The hard wall of your own line of sight. The perfectly circular shadow during a lunar eclipse. Stars that shift position as you travel. Time zones that only make sense wrapped around a sphere, flight paths curving toward the truth, gravity pulling toward a center rather than a single direction, a shadow the planet casts on its own sky every evening, thousands of competing cameras in orbit, a navigation system billions of people rely on every day, and 700 human witnesses who have seen it with their own eyes. None of these proofs require trusting a single institution. Most of them require nothing more than a clear sky, a coastline, or a willingness to look up. The evidence was never hidden. It was always just outside. Subscribe to Cosmic Hives. See you in the next one.